A scream trapped in your throat, eyes wide open, but your body refuses to move. And in the corner of your room, something is watching. This isn't a nightmare, this is sleep paralysis. Tonight, we descend into the realm between sleep and wakefulness, a place where your mind is alert, but your body is frozen. These are 5 true stories of sleep paralysis, each more terrifying than the last. So, dim the lights and prepare yourself for a journey into the shadows of the subconscious. Maria was a 28-year-old trauma nurse in Austin, sharp, calm, under pressure, and used to late nights filled with blood and alarms. But that Thursday was different. The heat was unbearable, the air heavy with the smell of asphalt and jasmine. When she finally made it home, her small apartment was silent, the only sound the slow, rhythmic whir of her ceiling fan. She left her bedside lamp on, as always, and slipped under the sheets, limbs aching. Somewhere between exhaustion and sleep, she felt the air shift. She couldn't move. Her eyes opened, but her body was frozen, stiff beneath an invisible weight. And in the corner of her bedroom, half shrouded in orange lamplight, stood a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat. He had no face, only a black, endless void where features should be. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. He just began walking toward her, slow as a clock winding down. His steps made no sound, but the floor seemed to creak inside her chest. Closer now, the figure leaned in until his shadow blanketed her entire body. There were no eyes, but she felt watched, like her bones were being counted. The air smelled metallic, old, like rusted coins. Just as his hand reached for her neck, Maria tore herself awake with a choked gasp. The room was empty, but the corner still felt occupied. Maria told no one, but she couldn't sleep in the dark after that. Every night she kept the lamp on, and every night she thought she saw something standing still in its glow, just out of focus. She read about sleep paralysis, about shadow people, about the Hat Man. Some said he was a shared hallucination. Others said he came only when you were at your lowest, feeding on fear. Maria wasn't sure which idea disturbed her more. 2 months later, she dozed off, with the TV still playing static. At 3:11 a.m., she jolted awake, not from a sound, but from silence. The screen had gone black, and in its reflection, there was the silhouette of a tall man standing right behind her. Some say the man in the hat never leaves. He just waits for the light to go out. They say he only comes when you're weakest, but sometimes they come when you're just tired enough to let them in. Our next story takes us far from the heat of Texas, into a dorm room thick with rain and sleepless thoughts, where the only thing worse than hearing whispers is realizing they know your name. Daniel was a college sophomore in Manhattan, just trying to survive finals week. His dorm room smelled like cold pizza and burnt coffee, the windows fogged from days of rain. Most nights he studied until dawn, then caught short naps with a hoodie over his eyes and earbuds in. The night it started, he dozed off at his desk, head against his arm, laptop humming. He didn't mean to fall asleep, but the moment he did, something began whispering his name. He woke up frozen, not groggy, paralyzed. His eyes darted around, the desk lamp flickering slightly, shadows stretching in the corners like spilled ink. The whispers were everywhere, circling him in low, breathy murmurs, forming words he couldn't understand. Then one shadow detached from the wall and reached for him. When its hand touched his forehead, he felt something enter. Daniel didn't talk to anyone. He just bought a night vision camera and set it up near his bed. For a week, every night was the same: whispers, paralysis, silence by morning. But when he played the footage, the recordings always blacked out, always exactly 7 minutes missing. The rest showed him lying perfectly still, eyes open, mouth slightly parted like he was listening. On the 7th night, he heard something new in the recording. A single, warped word whispered at the end. It sounded almost like, "Stay." He tried sleeping at friends' places. The whispers followed, A professor told him it might be sleep paralysis, but he'd had that before. This felt different, like being watched from inside. He stopped recording after night 8. The blackout gap had grown to 13 minutes. He swore he saw a faint shadow behind his reflection in the dorm mirror, though no one stood behind him. Sometimes he'd wake up with that same icy sensation on his forehead, like the shadow was marking him. He doesn't talk about it now, just keeps his lights on, sleeps with headphones playing white noise, but every so often the whispers return. Never longer than 13 minutes, and always in the dark, between 2:43 and 2:56 a.m. A rumor spread around campus last year. If your phone glitches at 2:43 a.m., don't check the time again, not until 2:57. Those are the minutes that belong to something else. 13 minutes of darkness. That's all it takes to lose a part of yourself. But time means little in our next story, because this one doesn't whisper or crawl or glitch. She waits, heavy, silent, ancient. Margaret lived alone in a weathered saltbox house tucked between the pines and the sea. At 70 she kept her days simple. Tea at dawn, church radio at noon, a crossword puzzle before sleep. The wind rattled the windows most nights, but the quiet never bothered her. She spoke to her late husband out loud sometimes, mostly in winter when the silence felt too complete. One night she paused mid-prayer because the room had gone too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. She woke just after 3, gripped by the feeling that someone was watching her. Not a creak, not a sound, just weight. Her chest felt pinned, like something heavy and cold was crouched on top of her. Her eyes opened to a face that didn't blink, a gaunt woman with matted hair and gaping black eyes. The woman's mouth moved in frantic silence like she was screaming underwater. Margaret couldn't scream back, her voice was gone. Panic clawed through her, but her body remained locked, heavy as stone. The air smelled sour, like mildew and something older. Earth that had never seen light. She stared at the hag, focused on her hand, willed it to twitch, just once. When her finger moved, the figure dissolved like steam. Margaret bolted upright, gasping, alone again in the cold. The lamp on her bedside table had burned out. The next morning, Margaret told her neighbour, an older woman who'd lived in the village her whole life. The moment she described the thing on her chest, the woman crossed herself. "You saw the old hag," she whispered. "She visits the still and the weak, been doing so long before any of us were born." There was no comfort in knowing it had a name, no comfort in realizing others had seen her too. Margaret started sleeping with a Bible under her pillow and never opened the window again. Sometimes Margaret still wakes up gasping, with no weight on her chest, but a presence in the room. The smell returns first, then the silence. She doesn't always see the hag now, but she feels her, just watching. The village says the old hag doesn't visit just once. She waits. Some say if you speak of her, you invite her back. Margaret doesn't talk about that night anymore, not even to her husband. Some spirits press down on your chest. Others wear your face. And in the shadows of Berlin, behind soft lamplight and familiar routines, one woman found herself staring into eyes she knew too well, and a grin that wasn't hers. Lena lived alone in a quiet Berlin flat, 5th floor, where the only sounds at night were tram bells and the sigh of the pipes. She worked long hours as a freelance designer, often falling asleep with her laptop still humming on the nightstand. Her apartment was small, warm, filled with sketches, half-drunk mugs of tea, and the soft flicker of an old floor lamp. Lately, though, she'd been waking up paralyzed, frozen in place, unable to speak, heart thudding like it knew something she didn't. She brushed it off, blamed the stress, the screen time, the usual excuses, until the night she saw herself. It started the same, her body locked, breath trapped beneath her ribs, the room still. But this time, at the foot of the bed, she saw someone. Not a shadow, not a dream. It was her. Same clothes, same posture, same weary eyes, but the grin it wore, slow, crooked, knowing, made her stomach turn cold. She couldn't blink, couldn't scream, only watch as her double began to crawl closer. The air smelled wrong, metallic like rusted iron and wet stone. The thing moved with uncanny grace, joints too fluid, like a reflection behaving just a beat too late. It leaned down inches from her face and whispered into her ear. Private things, childhood secrets, a dream she'd never spoken aloud. Her limbs trembled under the surface as if drowning in syrup. Then, without warning, she could move, and the figure was gone. Lena didn't tell anyone. She kept the lights on, taped the bathroom mirror, and left her bedroom door half open each night. She searched online, forums, articles, folklore, but found only fragments. Warnings not to speak to your reflection, stories of people replaced. Some said doppelgangers were omens of death. Others, that they were invitations. Since that night, she's felt off balance, like something is watching just behind her eyes. Her own voice sometimes echoes in places she didn't speak. Lena never saw the double again, but on certain nights around 3 a.m. she wakes to silence so complete it hums. And then, faintly, from the hallway mirror, a soft chuckle just like hers, followed by a whisper in her voice. I remember everything you forgot. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what watches you from the mirror. It's what waits when you look away. Our next story drifts east, to a quiet room where the light hums, the tatami creaks, and something much too small is standing far too still. Kenji moved into a modest third-floor unit on the outskirts of Tokyo, a quiet neighborhood where the streetlights flickered like old film reels. The apartment was bare but clean, with a faint scent of aged tatami and cedar. He unpacked slowly, stacking his books by the window, humming to fill the silence. That night, he made tea, slid the futon out, and turned off the light. As he drifted off, the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. In the far corner, something darker than shadow seemed to be waiting. He woke to stillness and pressure. His limbs wouldn't move, only his eyes, dry and strained, could shift slightly. There in the corner, a child, small, motionless, facing the wall. The air thinned as the child turned, revealing a face stretched too wide and eyes like hollow pits. It didn't walk, it crawled. With limbs that bent the wrong way, popping softly with each jolt forward, its hands slapped the floor, wet, slow, deliberate, closing the distance to his bed. Kenji felt tears on his cheeks but couldn't blink them away. Just as its face began to rise over the mattress, his body broke free. He slammed the light on. There was nothing there. He told no one. Called in sick. Spent the next day pacing the hallways of a convenience store until sunrise. He convinced himself it was a dream, until the laughter returned, soft, childlike, always behind him, never recorded. Sometimes he'd catch toys on the television commercials turning slightly on their own, and always that same corner, darker than the rest of the room, no matter how many lamps he added. Kenji moved out a week later, leaving the key on the floor and the door unlocked. The landlord didn't ask why. Neighbors say no one stays long in Unit 303. Some mention sleep paralysis. Others say it's the sound, like a child laughing through closed teeth. But the most unsettling detail is this. Everyone who's heard it swears the laughter comes from the corner, even when they're in a room with no corners at all. Sleep paralysis blurs the line between dreams and reality, leaving us vulnerable to the darkest corners of our minds. You made it to the end, or maybe that was just the beginning. If your lights flicker tonight, don't panic. Just remember, you clicked subscribe. Now, you're one of us.